So there was a whole series of paintings called the Autamps. I wound up calling them the Autamps, which isn't really French or not really Latin. It's sort of, it means though, to my mind, it means all time, sort of a version of all time. So therefore the Life, Death, Birth, Resurrection series. And I eventually folded the next series of paintings into that as well, which was a series of war paintings. When I won a Pew in 1993, and that's a grant that allowed me to just paint for 2 years without having to worry about selling anything or making any other money, because I was surviving in those years in the late 80s and early 90s. Even though I had a gallery in New York and I was selling paintings, I also really was surviving by painting portrait commissions. I'd learned to paint portraits at the Pennsylvania Academy, and I knew that I could always have that to fall back on if paintings weren't selling. But the good thing about all of these large paintings was, when you do a large painting, you're not doing it to sell. You're not doing it for any reason other than to just do the painting. So by being that scale, you know you're not going to sell it because it's too big for anybody to house. So with the Autamps, I had done this first 5 series of Object Permanence and Tarmac and Damascus Road, and there was one called Death and one called Resurge Renasse. And those paintings, I used those to submit for the Pew grant in 1992-ish into 1993. And I wrote in my application, I actually had forgotten that you were supposed to have a written application. I just kept thinking about which paintings will I submit. And I just was thinking about the visuals. Everybody else in Philadelphia at the time was actually going to these classes about how to write grants, you know, and how to win. And I just was in my studio painting. And then I remember the day before that I was supposed to write something up. There was paperwork that went with it. And so I actually, I remember asking my ex-wife, her, would you help me type something up? She's like, no, you waited this late, you do it yourself, you know? And so I couldn't type. So I got a piece of paper and I put it in the thing, in the typewriter. It was an old Royal typewriter. I want to win a Pew Foundation grant. You know, I was like, I don't know, that's what I'm really doing, right? I want to win one. And I will do a series of large paintings about war. I was just like making it up on the fly. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. And so I didn't think I'd win, you know. So turns out, and then my last sentence was, I was like 3 sentences practically. At the very end I wrote, thank you for having this grant and this opportunity, you know, very appreciative for you even doing this. And I figured, why not say that, because I was really truly grateful that somebody was giving money to artists. How great is that? So it turns out I won miraculously. Years later, I actually asked the person in charge why I won, because there were other people that I knew were really great that were competing as well at the same time. And she said, because you were the only person that thought to thank us in your write-up. Everybody else was like, I'm so great, I'm the greatest person in the whole world, all these like big words, and like, but you just wrote, you know, thank you for doing this. And it was like, for the people who had been judging all this time, it was a hard job to do. They were like, the fact that you said thanks like meant a lot to everybody. So like they like swayed you to that school of charm, right? It taught me well. That served me well. So anyway, so the series of paintings was that I'd said I would do would be a series of paintings on war, but not focused on the heroic aspects of war, but on the consequences of war, women, children, the real life human consequences of war. So I had a whole list of paintings that I would do, and Hiroshima was actually the first one, and this was the second one that I did. And I had rented a big space out in Swedesburg, Pennsylvania, right near Valley Forge, right along the Schuylkill River, right where Washington would go through when he was back encamped out at Valley Forge. And the church right beside my studio was the church that he attended. So it was very ensconced in American history. And I started this painting one very cold winter. And it was the coldest winter in a decade, and snow was everywhere. And so I wanted to do a painting, just call it Civil War. I liked the title. I liked the way it suggested what we were still going through in ways in the country. And so I had this figure, like a Clara Barton kind of figure. You know, the women would come out and help the soldiers, both Union and Confederate, at the end of the battles. The only battles that was fought in the Civil War in the snow was the Battle of Nashville. So I set it literally in the Battle of Nashville. In the winter, as I understand it, during the Civil War, the actual people would go back home because it was just too cold. They didn't fight in the winter in the snow. They'd go back home. You know, there's that scene in Gone with the Wind where Rhett Butler's like coming back, and like soldiers are coming back from the war and they go again. Like that was because it was winter and they would do it seasonally. So it was a freak snowstorm in the Battle of Nashville, so I guess they weren't expecting it yet. And I have the central figure, my favorite model, Hannah Dalton, who posed for me in a lot of my paintings during these years in the 90s, is posing as the central matriarchal figure. This was a self-portrait. There's actually a photo in the brain of me posing with Hannah. And then again, for just tonal relationship reasons, it wasn't working, so I transformed it into an African-American figure. I figured he was a slave, had been an escaped slave, who'd gone and started to fight in the Union. So he's dressed in the Union pants, and his uniform is in front of him there. I was well into the painting, well into it. I was 3/4 of the way through, and I thought, I can't believe it, this painting. Like, it's so archetypal. No one's ever seen anything like it. I can't wait to unveil it for people. And then one day I walked into my studio, I unlocked the door, and I walked in, and I was like, it's a Pietà. It's just like, what was I thinking? It's just a Pietà. That's all it is. It's a big version of the Pietà, a painted version. So it's the Mary and the Christ figure, like an entombment, or at the base of the cross. That winter, I would actually shovel snow in. I shoveled snow into my studio and piled it up on the concrete floor and painted with her sitting there from life as I painted the snow piled up. So every day I'd pile it up and paint it. And she sat on it. And then I had polyurethane out in front, so as it melted, and so the ripple was just like the reflection was from the wet snow and the polyurethane. It became like a lake, a frozen pond. I was working on. I just finished spending a lot of time with Andrew Wyeth. I'd made the film Snow Hill, and so this is a sort of it's not a pastiche, but it's sort of an homage to Wyeth over there, the Chadds Ford area. It's actually Valley Forge, but it looks like Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. Andy had done a painting called Breakup of this African American's hands coming up out of the snow, and so I used that to reference here. He also had a painting called Thin Ice, where you see leaves down under the ice, and so you see leaves under the ice. So I used all of my different influences to put into the painting.